Okay, perfect. We'll get started. Everyone can see me now. I am going to get my co-host to actually text me if there's any major questions. For some reason, the chat box just isn't popping up, but please feel free to utilize it if there's any issues or if you're having trouble hearing me or seeing me. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start by actually introducing myself. So my name's Gina Judge. I am a financial consultant who's worked in the industry for 6 years. During this time frame, I've helped thousands of Canadians improve their overall financial well-being. 2 years ago, I actually left my full-time job at the bank and I started my consulting company and podcast, the MMG. In that time frame, we've also helped thousands of people all across the globe. Currently, we're on a mission to empower women to basically take control of their life and their financial future in terms of making better decisions with their money. So a lot of what we do with our clients is we apply a holistic approach to finance, very similar to what we'll be doing in today's session. Applying a holistic approach to finance means I'm not just focusing on investing. I'm not just focusing on budgeting. I'm actually teaching you how to win with your money when it comes to managing debt, managing your credit score and building it to a spot where it gets to excellent, understanding how to manage your cash flow, set up multiple streams of income. So my goal is to really help my clients reach millionaire status in their lifetime. And the clients that work with me know they're going to get there sooner, as opposed to if they never worked with me at all. So as we speak, the MMG is going through a massive growth period. There's a huge need for financial education, and our goal is to make an impact on financial literacy at a global scale. Can everyone see me? I'm just getting a text where someone mentioned they can't see me.
We can see you, Gina. I think if you can't see Gina, you just have to change your view to exit full screen, and then you should be able to see her.
Thanks, Arish. Perfect. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to wipe my camera too. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the MMG and a background on my company. We are a financial literacy company that is basically, the reason I created it is because I wanted to inform and educate millennials, specifically women, on how to win with their money without giving up everything that they love. So full on disclaimer, anything that we talk about today is not investment advice. It's not financial advice. Our goal is to educate you. And again, we apply a holistic approach to finance. So we take a look at budgeting, investing. We teach you how to manage student loans. We teach you how to become debt-free. And we believe that by focusing on all these different areas of finance, it's basically building a formula that's going to help you live a more fulfilled life full of opportunities. With the MMG, we also focus on women. A common question I get is, well, do you work with men? Of course, I work with men, but personally for myself, my mission is to really help women kind of take their finances to the next level. We're big believers that regardless of the strong man in your life, it's so important that you learn how to lead a financially independent life. In addition to this, we really focus on women of color. The financial well-being of women of color is critical in today's world. Women of color specifically face a lot of unique challenges that impact their ability to build long-term wealth. But despite these challenges existing, women of color, specifically Black and Brown women, are getting college and graduate degrees in increasingly high numbers. So financial literacy alone isn't the solution to kind of bridge the racial wealth gap, but it does give women the right foundation and it provides them with the skills that they need to build wealth. A little bit more about when we started and why we started. So during the pandemic, I realized that millions of people were actually struggling with their finances. There were so many people that weren't prepared for an emergency. At the time, I worked for a financial institution, and one of my biggest takeaways, or one of the moments that really stuck with me, is when I had a client calling in saying, hey, I can't make my mortgage payment. My child has a disability. She has a feeding tube. We don't have the formula to feed her. And it was a really upsetting conversation that stuck with me. But the sad part is she wasn't the only person going through that. We were dealing with thousands of calls on a daily basis where people were saying, hey, I can't make my mortgage payment. I'm going to default and I need you to help me. So during this period of time, I decided to start a podcast, and the MMG podcast was more so a passion project. I wanted to create financial content that anyone in the world could access for free. And I really just wanted to give them hope that this wouldn't be there forever. No matter how much you're struggling with your finances, whether you're dealing with credit card debt, you're struggling living paycheck to paycheck, or maybe you're in a position where you have money, but you're scared to invest or pull the trigger when it comes to purchasing real estate. You won't feel this way forever, as long as you take actionable measures towards building a stronger financial future. And that's why all of you are here today. Something that you'll often hear me saying is that I am a big believer that when my clients work with me, I basically help them become the best version of themselves. So if you are interested in working with me, we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like as we go throughout the presentation. Next, I'll talk to you a little bit about my story. So anyone that's ever worked with me, you'll often hear me say that I have made every single money mistake in the book, from racking up debt to ruining my credit score to depleting my savings. I've done it all. So when people work with me and sometimes, they're a little shy or they're nervous because they feel like I'm going to judge them, I'm really not. I've seen absolutely everything, every possible worst case scenario you could think of. And I've also been in your shoes. So in terms of my story, I was raised by a strong single mom. I grew up in Vancouver, and that was really tough. For anyone that's been raised by a single parent, you probably understand firsthand that it has a unique set of challenges. Surviving off a single income household is not easy. So growing up for me, my mom was working, 3 jobs at a time. She came to Canada, couldn't speak English. My biological father was an alcoholic and a drug addict, and he was never really in the picture. And it was just me and my mom. So it was really tough. And I remember growing up, I didn't have those luxuries. I didn't have an allowance. I didn't have, even if I wanted a toy as a kid, my mom would take a look at the price tag and she'd be like, no, we can't afford this. So as I got older, eventually my mom got remarried, and it was nice because now, our lifestyle was a little bit easier because it wasn't just her income, it was her and her spouse's. But my stepfather was also an alcoholic. And as I got older, the home environment became very toxic for me. So at 18, I made a sudden decision to move out of my household. And it was a very difficult decision to make. For anyone that is Punjabi, you likely know how it is culturally growing up in a household that's very strict. But it was a very difficult decision that I made in the heat of the moment. And I firmly believe that that decision in my life changed the entire trajectory of my life. So that decision for me to move out was probably the best thing that I could have done from a mental health perspective, in terms of getting out of the toxic environment, but it really pushed me back financially. And the reason it pushed me back is because you don't learn about these things in school. You don't learn about budgeting in school. You don't learn about credit. You don't learn about debt. And unfortunately, when I moved out, I continued to spend money as if I was still living at home rent free, despite having all of these new expenses. Eventually, I depleted my savings. I was in school full time. I couldn't qualify for a student loan. So it got really messy. But the one thing that changed was me becoming financially educated. So I started working for a financial institution. I got different designations. But amazingly enough, within a year of me working at a bank, I got out of debt. I started investing. I built up an emergency savings, and I built an excellent credit score. So one of the reasons that I do what I do today is because when I was struggling, I had no one to turn to. I didn't have a mentor. I didn't have anyone that I could ask questions, and I didn't really have any support on the financial side of things. And I also understand that there are a ton of other women who are struggling and they're not talking about it. So basically, I want to be that person for you, and I want to be able to provide those resources so that you can progress forward and just build a healthy life, both when it comes to your finances, but also any other goals that you might have in mind. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why you're here today. So I am going to ask questions, and then I'm going to try to take a look at the chat box, even though it's not working. But please do try to utilize the chat box to answer any of the questions I have. So right now, does anyone feel comfortable describing what they think inflation is? Again, in your best words, or however you want to put it, what do you think inflation is? I'm sorry if the presentation disappears. I just need to. Cost of living increasing. Perfect. Jessica nailed it. So inflation is the idea that the cost of basic goods and services is going up. And we're seeing it firsthand right now. For anyone that's gotten groceries lately, you're probably looking at your receipt wondering why it's so high despite only buying a few items. Anyone that's getting gas lately, you're probably realizing, hey, the price of everything has gone up. So inflation is one of the reasons that you're probably here. Canada's inflation rate rose to 8.4% in June this year, which is the highest we've seen in a decade. So that's probably one of the reasons that you're here. You're trying to understand like what's going on. I'm making the same amount, but I'm not left with the same amount after I get paid. Canadians are also experiencing record-breaking credit card debt. And a lot of Canadians are relying on credit card to manage these inflation costs. So I firsthand, over the last 2 months, have noticed a ton of clients coming to me, which again, no judgment, but they're carrying very large credit card balances and they're struggling to pay their debt down. So today we're going to talk about different strategies you can use. But again, credit card balances and consumer debt is on the rise. In Canada, specifically in BC, and again, there are some people in this chat that aren't in BC, but it's pretty relevant to wherever you are as well. The average balance, the average amount that a BC resident owes outside of their mortgage is close to $22,000. And that's insane to me. Interest rates are rising. So when you look at mortgage rates and interest rates in general, interest rates are rising and they will continue to increase, meaning that for those of you that do have mortgages or a home equity line of credit, or if you have parents that have mortgages, money is going to only get tighter, and we need to prepare for a recession. The likelihood of us going into a recession is very high. So one of the reasons you're here is because you want to learn more about steps that you can take to prepare for the recession. Okay, let's talk about a couple of stats that I found very interesting. So when I was looking at Stats Canada, I found that only 39% of Canadians know how to budget. So today, one of the very first things we're going to talk about, and I'm going to teach you, is the importance of budgeting and more importantly, how to do it. So even with the clients that I've worked with over the last while, over 2 years, I've worked with thousands of clients and not a single person was building their budget correctly. In most cases, most people didn't even have one. 49% of Canadians don't know how to invest. So for those of you that are tuning in for the first time, just so you're aware, every month I host a masterclass on investing. So if you find this helpful, you will have the opportunity to enroll for my last one, which is on December 11th. It's the last one for 2022. But 49% of Canadians don't know how to invest. 61% of Canadians don't know where to go to even get information about investing. 56% of Canadians don't know their credit score. And fun fact, when it comes to credit, is someone that has an excellent credit score versus someone that just has a decent credit score is actually going to save $56,000 more in their lifetime. 60% of Canadians don't know how much they need to retire comfortably. So again, I'm going to pause. If you could utilize the chat box, how much money do you think the average Canadian needs to have by retirement to live comfortably? If there was a golden number, what do you think that golden number is? Again, I'm going to have to, minimize the screen. Someone said 1 million, 750,000, 4 million, a million. So yeah, it sounds like a lot of people are in the $1 million range. In this day and age, if you are making $60,000 or more annually, you actually need $1.6 million to survive. I'm going to pause and I want every single person right now to think about what they're doing today to get to 1.6 million by retirement. Think about it. And fortunately for you, I will share tips as to how you're going to get there later on in this presentation. But I really want you to think about how you are going to save 1.6 million by the time you turn 65. 73% of Canadians say that money is the leading cause of tension in their relationship. So you'll consistently hear me say that money may not be the most important thing in the world, but it impacts everything that is, from your health, because a lot of people that struggle with mental health issues or even critical illness, money could have caused that. Relationship issues, the food you eat, the places you live, the opportunities that you receive. Something that, like, a common factor with all of those things is money. Okay, so step one, and the first thing that we're going to talk about, and one of the most important things, is budgeting. For those of you that are just tuning in, if you are living in BC, I am hosting a workshop on Saturday, December 3rd, and this is going to be an intensive in-person session. A lot of what we talk about today is kind of like a good segue into what I'm teaching in the class. It'll be a lot more in-depth. We'll build your personal budget. We'll take a look at your actual credit bureau. But today you're kind of get a feel of what that class is going to look like. So when it comes to budgeting, the first thing that you need to understand is at the very minimal, you need to understand how much money is coming in and how much money is going out. So when people say, hey, Gina, I want to purchase a property, I want to start investing in the stock market, I want to earn passive income, which is income you're earning without even lifting a finger. I want to travel every year, or I want to travel multiple times throughout the year. I want to pay down my debt and I never want to end up in debt again. I want to start a business. I don't want to do this whole 9-to-5 thing anymore. I want to start my dream business. I want to retire comfortably, or I want to save for my child's education. All of these reasons, you need to start with a budget. Like that's step one. So again, at the very minimum, you need to understand how much money is coming in and going out. By building a budget, one, it's going to indicate exactly where you can scale back. And more importantly, how much money you need to generate in order to be able to achieve these goals. So I always tell my clients, it's like your blueprints, and this is where you start. So let's talk about some budgeting methods. There's a ton of budgeting methods out there. I'm going to go over my top 3, but then I'm going to share my very favorite one, which is the zero-based budget. So the zero-based budget is the idea that when you take a look at how much income is coming in and all of your expenses, every single dollar in your paycheck has a place in your budget. So a zero-based budget is, let's say hypothetically, I make $1,000 a month. And then all of my expenses equal 900. At the very bottom of the budget, it's going to say, okay, Gina, if you make $1,000 a month and your expenses are 900, you have $100 left. Zero-based budgeting is the idea that I'm going to take that $100 at the bottom of my budget and I'm going to put it somewhere, and then the number at the bottom is going to be 0. So ideally, I would take that 100 and I'd say, okay, every month I'm going to save $100. Zero-based budgeting is one of the reasons that most of my clients have been able to get out of debt. They've been able to build an emergency savings. They've been able to start investing consistently. And a lot of my clients have been able to purchase real estate as a result of implementing this strategy into their lifestyle. But for some people, maybe they just want to start right away and they don't have the time to go through all of their statements to determine exactly what their fixed income and expenses look like. Then you might go for like the 50-30-20. The 50-30-20 budgeting technique is the idea that 50% of your income is allocated towards your needs. Think of needs like shelter costs, food, groceries, transportation, medication. These are the needs in your life. So 50% of your income can be allocated towards the needs. 30% goes towards wants. Wants are like all those unnecessary subscriptions that are charging your credit card, those vacations that you want to save for, dining out, entertainment and fun, going to Cactus Club every weekend, shopping at Sephora. 30% of your paycheck can go towards all of your wants, but the last 20% has to go towards savings. So ideally, the good rule of thumb and something you might want to write down is if you can, try to save 20% of your paycheck. So if you get paid every 2 weeks, take 20% of whatever is going into your checking account and plop it into your savings. Better yet, take 20% of your paycheck and plop it into an investment account. And lastly, there's the envelope method. So when I have clients that approach me and they're really struggling with food is a big one. Most people overspend on food. It's just across the board, regardless how old you are. Most people just overspend on food. So if I'm working with a client named like Sarah, for example, and I see Sarah's really struggling with dining out, I might say, Sarah, since we've allocated about $550 to dining out, I'm going to get you to take that $550 out as cash, throw it into an envelope, and then every time you go to Cactus Club, every time you go grab coffee, use that $550 as cash, because it's going to help her have a better understanding of whether she's about to overspend or if she's in line with what she's estimated. So if Sarah says, hey, Gina, by the end of the month, I only want to spend $550 on dining out, and now it's the 15th of the month and she only has $200 left, she probably knows that, hey, either I have to make more money or I might need to scale back in a different category so that I don't overspend on food this month. So the envelope method is a really great way to hold yourself accountable. Because when you're just tapping your card, it's easy to rack up credit card debt, or you're just not mindful of exactly how much money is left in your account. I'm going to pause for a second. If you have any questions about budgeting methods, I am going to share a budget with you in a second. But if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far, feel free to utilize the chat box, and I'm going to reference to it right now.
We do have some questions in the chat, Gina. We have
Okay.
one person asking us, should the 20% savings be allocated for all categories, like into RSP, etc.?
Good question. Yeah, actually, let's do the system where you read out the questions. That's better for me. So 20% savings. In a second, I'm going to talk to you about how you prioritize what's left over. So again, when I work with my clients, and one of the reasons that I'm hosting this workshop in Surrey is because the advice that I give you or the tips that I share with you need to be personalized to you. So right now, what I'm going to say is if you have 20% left over, your first goal is to build an emergency savings. So if you have absolutely nothing set up in an emergency savings, that's your first priority. But if you're someone that has a strong cash flow and your emergency savings is like half built up, then I might say, hey, let's take 10% of whatever's left over, throw it into your emergency savings, and maybe let's take another 10% and plop it into your retirement account because you need to start saving for retirement. Or maybe you're someone that's in a higher income bracket and it makes sense to take more than 10% of what's left over and throw it into your RSPs because RSPs have tax benefits associated with it. Again, this might seem a little confusing or overwhelming, but I do offer other services where I go into those specific types of accounts in more depth. But the best way that I can answer that question is it really is dependent on the person and where they're at. First goal is always emergency savings. Beyond that, after you've built up your emergency savings, is saving for the long term or saving for something that is short term, like your wedding, or saving for your child's education, or saving for a down payment. So that's kind of how you decide where you're going to allocate that money. It doesn't have to go into one account. It could be 20% split amongst 3 goals that you have. Any other questions?
Yeah, we've got one more. For the 20% savings, what are some good accounts to help have that money grow?
That's a really great question. So the 20% that you're trying to save, if it's an emergency savings that you're building up, which means you always need to have a safety net. What am I trying to say? A nest egg or a safety net of 3 months of income set aside. So if you don't have that, that's where your 20% is going to go. And you'd want to keep it in something called a high interest savings account. In Canada, EQ Bank pays the most in interest on a high interest savings. So you can write down EQ Bank to look into their products. Now, if you're someone that already has that safety net built up, the next step for you is to start saving for your future or that bigger goal that you have in mind. And that's where you might want to look into investment accounts. You might want to look into like index funds, which we'll talk a little bit more about, mutual funds. And it also depends on how long you have before you need to access that money. Any other questions?
This one's kind of generic, but do you have an average someone should put aside for their emergency savings?
An average. Okay, so we will talk about that in the session. So I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time, but that question will be answered for you. Okay, let's talk about the power of a budget. And this is the last thing that we'll touch on when it comes to budgeting. So I'm going to open up this link and you should be able, you can see my screen, right, Arush? Arush?
Sorry, one more time. You cut out. One more time.
You can see my screen, right? The budget?
Yes, we can. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. So budgeting is really important and I'm a visual learner. So I wanted to share an example of a budget with you. So anyone that signs up for my workshop in Surrey, you are actually going to build this live with me during the actual live session that we're doing. Outside of that, if you aren't based out of BC or you don't live in Surrey and you can't attend, I do offer one-on-one consultations where I help my clients build these, but in the workshop itself, I'm going to be building it with you one-on-one. So this is a client that approached me. She was actually a part of my coaching program. Every quarter, I work with 10 ambitious women that are either trying to get ahead financially, and it's basically my mentorship program. So this client approached me, and when she approached me and I built her budget in February, she built her budget. So let's go through this one by one. So this is a client that had a little bit more of a complex financial picture. So she was earning salary. She also owned 2 properties. She owned a condo in Vancouver, and then she owned her detached home in Vancouver where she got rental income. So we see her salary income up here. We see her rental income there, and then she had 3 kids, so she was also getting child tax benefits. So when you guys build your budget, you got to incorporate every single income stream you have. So every single income stream you have, you're going to plug it in at the top. You guys can use any type of template to really build a budget. There's even apps like Mint where you can build your budget using their platform. But I've built this spreadsheet and all of my coaching clients and anyone that books a service with me gets access to this. So the second part of this budget, you're going to see her fixed expenses. Again, fixed expenses are the non-negotiables in your life. And the budgeting technique that I love is budgeting to zero. So I don't do the whole 50, 30, 20 thing. I think it's a great place to start when someone isn't budgeting at all, but the zero-based budgeting technique is where the money's at. So when you take a look at your fixed expenses, you're literally plugging everything in. So in her case, we plugged in her mortgage. We also incorporated her property taxes. So has anyone in this chat ever heard of the term sinking fund? And if you have heard of the word sinking fund, please share what you think a sinking fund is. And then Aruj, if you could just read it out, I appreciate it.
Of course.
Has anyone heard of the word sinking fund?
We got money that you won't get back. Yes, it's for day-to-day expenses, money set aside if you lose a job, etc.
Okay, these are really good examples. The money set aside in case you lose your job is an emergency savings, but you're right, it's a sinking fund. So I'm going to break down what sinking funds are. A lot of people have never heard of this term, and in my workshop, I'm actually going to teach you how to open up sinking funds and which ones would apply to you. So sinking funds are basically expenses in your life that can cause you to go into debt. For anyone here that's carrying credit card debt, this might resonate with you. So let's use car maintenance as an example. I'm sure almost every person in this chat owns a vehicle. So with your car, do you get an oil change every month? Probably not. Do you change your tires every month? Probably not. But in the months when you have to pay for an oil change and you need to get your tires changed, it's an added expense that you weren't anticipating. So what do? We put it on our credit card, and what do you know? Now you have debt owing on your credit card. And if someone's living like a very tight lifestyle where, they're just getting by, or, their finances are a little chaotic and disorganized, this is how credit card debt forms. So I teach my clients how to build sinking funds into their budget. And sinking funds are so important because the reason my clients are able to become debt-free or invest consistently and achieve goals like owning a home faster than if they didn't work with me is because of this. It's the importance of building financial systems. So sinking funds, again, are money or expenses that pop up throughout the year. They're not monthly expenses, but the reason that you want to turn them into monthly expenses is because you want to force yourself to save for these things. Some other examples of sinking funds are property taxes. If you're a homeowner, you don't pay property taxes every month. Usually sometime in June or July, for example, in BC, the city sends you a notice and they say, hey, what do you know? You owe us a couple $1,000s. And then homeowners freak out because they haven't set that money aside. Some other examples of sinking funds, and one that I personally love, is the vacation fund. I think every single person in this chat deserves to go on a vacation at least once or twice a year. Like, you work so hard for your money, you deserve to travel and experience things. And I'm a big believer in spending our money on experiences as opposed to products. So when it comes to spending money on vacations, again, so many people, when I'm looking at their credit card statements and I'm trying to determine why they're in debt, it's because they paid for a vacation that they realistically didn't save for ahead of time. So what I do is I teach you based on how much income you and your household are making. Based on your expenses, this is how much money you can set aside for travel. And every month we put systems in place so that you're saving for it. So again, in this client's case, she needed to save $3,600 roughly per year for travel. That was $300 a month. Eventually, we built a system where this client was putting money aside for travel so that when she booked a trip to Mexico, she had a savings account just separated from everything else where she could dip into it to pay for that vacation and not feel guilty about it either. Some other sinking funds are clothing, makeup, hair, and skincare. A ton of girls love to shop at Sephora. And what do you know? With inflation, the cost of everything has gone up. So sinking funds are a system that you definitely want to learn. I obviously don't have too much time today to go into all the nitty gritty, but in my workshop at Surrey City Hall, I will be discussing this. And every single person that goes through this workshop will have something like this built, where one, they're going to know exactly how much money they're going to have left over at the end of the month and where it needs to go, whether it's paying off debt, investing in their RSPs, saving for a vacation, or doing all of the above. The last thing that I'll mention with this budget is this client, take a look at the bottom. When she first started working with me in February, she was spending almost more than $2,000 than she was making. So although this client wasn't in debt, the first question I asked her is, hey, the money that you have saved up, have you noticed that your savings balance has been dropping every month? And she was like, yeah, Gina, like my savings account, I work so hard to save, but every single month the balance has been going down. So this is her February budget. By the time she finished working with me and she graduated from my coaching program, not only was she not in a deficit anymore, she was able to save more than $1,000 every month. So she went from spending more than $2,000, like being in a deficit, to being in a surplus. So this is the impact of building financial systems, working with someone that's actually going to help you put a plan in place that's so catered to you, because no one person in this room has the exact same amount of income, and no one person in this room has the exact same amount of expenses, nor does anyone have the exact same goals. We're all in different stages of our life. We all make different amounts of income and we all have different expenses, but it's a matter of knowing how to build these systems and then working towards them consistently. So by the time she was done with me, she was in a surplus. She was saving for her child's education. She had an RESP account for all 3 kids that was growing. She was investing for retirement, and her emergency savings is built up. Any questions? We'll talk about credit in a second. I see that in the Q&A. Anything on your end, Arush?
Nope, no questions. We're good here.
Okay, perfect. So that's budgeting in a nutshell. Just to reiterate, if you want access to this template, I offer one-on-one services for anyone that's outside of BC. You can always book a one-on-one, but I really think that this workshop is going to be super beneficial for anyone that's located in the Lower Mainland or Surrey. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Perfect. So I hope that your key takeaway from that is that you need to find a way to build a budget, or at the very minimal, figure out how much money is going in and out and apply some sort of strategy when it comes to managing your cash flow, whether it be the 50-30-20 rule or ideally building a zero-based budget. The second thing that we're going to talk about now is managing debt. So this is a huge issue for a lot of Canadians. And again, there's people in this chat that aren't in Canada, but managing debt is a very significant issue. Stats Canada recently announced that Canadians are sliding deeper into debt. The average Canadian owes $1.82 for every $1 they earn. So the reason that people aren't able to pay off their debt is because they owe more than they're making. So this is how you're going to manage any debt that you have. And I will state that there's both good debt and bad debt. The wealthy, the people, like the richest people, they actually leverage debt. They take out loans and then they invest it to make more money. So it's really important that you understand the difference between good debt and bad debt. But for the sake of today's conversation, we're going to focus on bad debt. Bad debt is things like credit cards, personal loans, loans through Fairstone where they're charging you an arm and a leg, payday loans, but in most cases, credit card debt. Step 1 to managing your debt is building a budget. So we've already talked about that. You kind of have an idea of what you need to look at. Step 2, and the most important step, is building debt repayment into your budget. I cannot stress to you how many times I've worked with clients, and when they're carrying debt, they're just putting odd amounts towards their credit card. Like, let's say someone makes $1,500, they get paid, and then they put $1,200 towards their credit card. And I'm just like scratching my head because I'm like, how does that make sense? You put $1,200 towards your credit card, and sure, temporarily the balance reduced, but I just showed you a budget where someone had all these expenses on a month-to-month basis. So what ends up happening is people take their paycheck, they put a majority of it towards their credit card, but then they don't think about the fact that they still have to make their mortgage or rent payment. They still have to make their car payment. They still have to pay for gas, groceries. So the reason that people and Canadians, are just generally speaking, people are unable to pay down debt is they don't have a plan. So the third thing that I say is you need to treat your credit card debt as a loan. So with a credit card, you're only required to make minimum payments, and it's like interest only payments. Another reason that credit card companies make so much money is because people are stuck in the cycle where they can't pay down their credit card debt because they're just making the minimum payment. Fun fact, if you look at your credit card statement and it has a balance, it'll say in like a very small font, it's going to take you like 32 years to pay this balance off if you just make the minimum payment. So what I teach my clients when I work with them is treat your debt like a loan. Don't make the minimum payment, make a fixed payment. Don't make a crazy large payment either. Find that sweet spot where you're actually going to pay it down. Think of your credit card debt as like a car loan or student loan. Every month you make a fixed payment towards your car loan. And the idea is that at the end of 5 years or whatever term you have, your car is going to be paid off. You have to have the same mentality with your debt. Again, when it comes to debt repayment in the workshop, this is something I'll be covering. If you book a one-on-one with me, I actually teach you exactly what type of payments you need to put towards your debt based on the interest rate, based on your income, and based on the frequency of payments you need to be making. Step 4 is to track your credit score. So even if you're not carrying debt right now, you will likely carry debt at some point in your lifetime. I already told you, debt is not a bad thing. Do not fear debt. It's credit card debt and high interest rate debt that you want to be mindful of. But your credit score is so important. So when it comes to building credit, an excellent credit score, I mentioned at the beginning of this call, an excellent credit score can save someone more than $56,000 in their lifetime. The reason being is when you take out a loan, whether it's a car loan, whether it's a student loan, whether it's a line of credit, a mortgage being the biggest one, your credit score is going to determine the rate of interest that you're paying. The average person that owns real estate pays close to $600,000 or more in interest in the life of the loan. The person that owns real estate that has a really low credit score will pay twice that. So they'll pay well over $1 million. So the thing that you want to pay attention to is your credit score. And there's steps that you can take to improve your score. Again, with the workshop that I'm hosting, I'm actually going to teach every single registrant how to read their credit bureau and give them tangible tips that they can apply to improve their credit score. One thing that I was going to mention, and we'll talk about it after though, is how to monitor your score. Your credit score is like a really helpful tool. If you know what your score is, you can use it to negotiate with lenders. And if you have an excellent credit score, where I've actually had my clients go back to their bank because I see that they have like a score of 740, yet they're paying like 12% on their line of credit. And I've said, no, go back to your bank and talk to them and say, hey, you're reducing my interest rate. There's no reason for someone with an excellent credit score to be paying 12% on a line of credit. And what do you know? The banks have actually dropped their interest rate. So again, you just don't know what you don't know, which is why financial education is so important. Step 5, which I kind of already talked about, you want to negotiate interest rates. You want to be in a position where you have a good score and the rate of interest that you're paying on your products is a reflection of that. In addition to this, if any one of you is carrying debt right now, definitely consider booking a one-on-one with me because I do work with people outside of my own company that are able to help you consolidate your debt at a lower interest rate and help you pay it down. There's a lot of different strategies that we can use. And finally, find ways to generate more income. It's not fun cutting back, and sometimes you can only scale back so much when it comes to your budget. So I always recommend that people find ways to make more money, and that is also something that I'll be covering in my workshop, or you can always book a one-on-one with me if you want to find ways to make more money, or if you even want to start a business. Someone said Equifax versus TransUnion, are they both important? Yes. And I love that you guys are using the Q&A. I can actually see that. So maybe let's stick to that. In Canada, there's 2 major credit reporting bodies. There's Equifax and there's TransUnion. They're both equally important. I'm going to be sharing a tool called Borrowell with you guys shortly. And with Borrowell, basically what it does is it pulls information from Equifax. Apps like Credit Karma pull information from TransUnion. And the reason that they're both important is, let's say hypothetically you go to TD Bank tomorrow to get a mortgage. TD Bank is going to use Equifax. If you go to a bank like Scotiabank, they have an internal credit rating system in place, but it's very similar to TransUnion. So the reason that you want to monitor your score on both platforms is because your credit score will actually differ on both platforms. So you want to have a good idea of what your score is. So that way, when you go to a financial institution and you know they're using Equifax, you have a better understanding of where your credit score is at. Really good question, though. The last thing that I'm going to say when it comes to managing debt is don't expect to see a change if you don't make one. And this is a really good thing to think about, and it really applies to anything that you do with your finances. If you don't do anything, nothing's going to happen. So I'm proud of everyone that joined the session today because obviously you're trying to make better decisions when it comes to your money. And the best thing that you can do is take what I'm teaching you and apply it to your own life.
We do have some questions, Gina.
Go ahead.
The first one is someone inquiring about when you will be doing your next workshop for those of us who are unavailable for the upcoming one.
So I will likely be doing another workshop through Zoom within the next 3 months for those that are outside of BC, or because of the holidays, they're not able to make it to the live session. So with that, in the next 3 months, I will be pretty much hosting the exact same workshop I'm hosting live in Surrey, online through Zoom. But unfortunately, obviously, when you're in person, like we're going to have worksheets, we're going to do activities, we're going to have guest speakers. So it's going to be much more of a better experience in person, but I will be doing something through Zoom in 3 months.
We have another one. How much should one be putting aside monthly for retirement?
So there's no golden answer. So it really comes down to your budget, right? And that's why when you work one-on-one with me, or if you go through the workshop, we're going to know what that magic number is for you. But generally speaking, if you're able to save 20% of your paycheck, try to put 10% aside every month for retirement. If you're older, for example, if you're in your mid 30s or 40s, you need to put more than 10% aside to kind of play catch up.
We have someone asking, what is considered a great credit score?
Anything over 740 is excellent in my eyes. Anything over 680 will help you qualify for a loan with a decent rate, but try to get over 740.
Follow-up question to that. What credit score do you need to negotiate lower interest rates?
Again, to get the best interest rate, probably 730. You should be able to lower it. But again, anything over 740, that's when you're going to go to the bank and say, hey, like you're charging me 12, like a 12% rate is ridiculous to me, because people with low credit get like 12% rates. So when I see my clients who are in really good positions financially, it's like I see that the bank has taken advantage of them at the end of the day, and they just didn't know better. Any others?
Yeah. Does it affect your credit score if you check on Equifax and TransUnion?
No. So Equifax and TransUnion, those are the actual credit reporting agencies, right? Like those are the ones that kind of regulate everything in Canada, and that's what the banks use. I think you can go to Equifax once a year and request a copy of your credit bureau, but apps like Borrowell and Credit Karma and Mogo that are out there, or some banks even have internal credit systems, those are soft credit checks. So in a nutshell, just for the sake of time, soft credit checks do not affect your credit score. So every time you check like Borrowell, it's not actually affecting you. And it's also not 100% accurate, just to keep that in mind. They have an algorithm in place where they're trying to calculate your score. But I'm going to keep going just for the sake of time, because I said this would end at 7:45 and we still have a bit to go. Hopefully the rest of you can stay a little bit longer, because we do have something at the end that we want to discuss with you, but I'm going to keep going. So when it comes to prioritizing debt, I posted this on Instagram recently, and I wanted to dive into this a little bit deeper. So any person in this chat that has debt, again, there's good debt, there's bad debt. I want you to print out statements, write this down. I want you to print out a statement for every single credit product that you have, whether it's a student loan, a line of credit, a credit card, a MasterCard, a mortgage. Print out your statements and highlight the interest rate. If you are carrying debt that is charged, like if you have a balance on a product that's charging you 10% or more, you are not to be investing right now. I see a lot of people where they're putting money into the stock market, where they're putting money into like a high interest savings account, but then they have this like $4,000 balance on their credit card that's charging them 19%. It doesn't make sense for you to try to save and invest when you're carrying high interest rate debt, because that debt is charging you 19%. And I can promise you, you're not going to make 19% in the stock market. It doesn't make sense. So prioritize debt that charges you 10% or more. If the amount that you owe is more than 5,000, I'm going to keep it simple. Book a one-on-one with me so that I can help you get your finances in order and potentially look into consolidation options. Secondly, if you highlight everything and there's, credit products that are charging you 5 to 10% in interest, try to focus on paying these debts down. So let's say hypothetically you have a line of credit as like $3,000 owing on it. I would recommend building up a small cash reserve and then focusing on paying this down. Do not invest until this debt is paid down. Finally, if you have debt that's charging you less than 5% in interest, or maybe you have a student loan that's not charging you anything at all, you are someone that, despite carrying debt, can invest, because you can likely make more than 5% in the stock market. We usually aim for like 8 to 10%, or you could find an investment vehicle that would yield you a higher return. So definitely use this as a guide as to how to prioritize your debt and what debt you'd want to pay off first. And I keep going again for the sake of time. There's a tool that I wanted to share with you for anyone that's currently carrying debt, or for anyone that eventually does carry debt in their lifetime. So again, with this budget, let's say hypothetically, this client was working with me, or she was going through my workshop and she said, hey, Gina, I have a little bit of debt owing on my credit card. So let's just pretend this client had, I don't know, $6,000 owing on her credit card at 19.99%. I would say, hey, client, let's pull up this debt repayment calculator, which we're going to do during the workshop. And we would say, okay, her current balance. So again, debt product type, it's a credit card. She owes $6,000. It's charging her 19.99% in interest. Now I'm going to tell this client, You're going to treat your credit card debt like a loan. What you're going to do is you're not going to make crazy lump sum payments like you have, because that hasn't actually paid down your debt. Let's find a strategy that makes sense for you. Usually when clients have a $6,000 credit card debt, we want to make healthy payments that make sense based on their budget. So let's just say, hey, client, you're going to pay this debt off in, I don't know, 48 months. Let's use that as a number. That would mean that she would have to put $182.55 towards her credit card. And within 48 months, her balance would be paid off. But maybe we look at her budget and we're like, hey, she can definitely afford more than $182. So let me just plug something in. Let's pretend she built her budget and she actually had about $240 left over. So then maybe we say 24 months. Or okay, let's just use this as a number. So now we take a look at this and we say, okay, in 30 months, if she makes a payment of $255.75, her debt is going to completely be paid off. So now she knows if I put $255.75 towards my credit card debt, within 30 months, my debt will be paid off. In the months where I make more money, or if I find ways to make more money, I'll put more towards it and I'll pay that debt off faster. And with this, she knows, okay, over the next 30 months, if I follow this, I'll have paid about almost $1,700 in interest. So this is a really great tool. You will get a copy of this because I'll be emailing everyone this calculator, but that's basically how you want to budget when you're trying to reduce debt. Okay, let's keep going. Let's talk about credit scores. So we kind of already touched on this, but when it comes to credit, it's important to take active steps to monitor your score. Monitoring your credit score is so important because it protects you from identity fraud. It also ensures that the information on your credit bureau is accurate. Your credit bureau can house several inaccuracies about you. I think I wrote 1 in 5 people have something like an error reporting on their credit report. So there's something incorrectly reporting to their credit report. And if they don't monitor their score, and if they don't monitor their report, they would have no idea. The only time that they would realize if they've been a victim of identity fraud or an error is when they go to the bank to apply for a loan, like a mortgage and a car or a car loan, and they get declined. So monitoring your credit score protects you from identity fraud, and it also protects you from inaccurate information reporting because you can take care of it right away. So I'd highly recommend looking into Borrowell. You'll get a copy of this link. That's my favorite app to use in Canada to monitor my credit score. They actually give you a free copy of your credit report and it updates every 8 days. So you'll get a link to this, or if you have me on Instagram, click the link in my bio and you'll see one of the options in my link tree is to download Borrowell. Building an excellent credit score qualifies you for the best rates. And again, the average consumer that has a fair score will end up paying $50,000 more in interest in their lifetime than someone that has an excellent score. So that's just one way that you'd be able to save $50,000 without even realizing it. Talk about emergency savings. So earlier on, when we were talking about the 50-30-20 rule, we talked about the importance of building up an emergency savings. So if you're brand new to saving money, your first move should be to build an emergency savings fund. I cannot stress to you how many times I have worked with clients who are investing in the stock market, investing for retirement, but they have no emergency savings, and it's so backwards. You guys have to build your emergency savings first. Now, in terms of how much, it really comes down to the person and the type of income they earn, which I'll be covering in the workshop more intently, depending on what type of work you do, whether you're self-employed or not. But the general rule of thumb is at least 3 months, in some cases 6, and in some cases 9, depending on whether you're self-employed or what your fixed expenses look like. But the reason you need to have an emergency savings is because it protects you in the event of job loss, illness, injury, or emergency. So for example, I want you to think about what would you do right now if you lost your job tomorrow. I personally know a financial institution that I used to work for that literally laid off 100 people yesterday. And every single person that got laid off was like, they weren't expecting it. They had no idea that it was coming. Those are people that no longer have jobs. And if they don't have emergency savings, which they likely don't because most people don't have an emergency savings, they're stuck. So job loss, illness, injury. The average illness and injury in Canada lasts up to 32 months. So imagine going 32 months without a paycheck. You need at the minimal 3 months of savings. Money should be kept in a high yield savings. Any money you set aside for an emergency should not be invested. Another common mistake I see people making, they put all their money into the stock market, a mutual fund, and an investment. And then an emergency happens and the stock market's down and they're like, okay, if I take this money out, I'm losing money. So keep it in a high yield savings. You never invest this money. If you dip into it, again, your car breaks down or you lose your job. If you end up dipping into your emergency savings, you pause all your other financial goals and you work on rebuilding that back up. Okay, let's talk about investing. I had a lot of people when they were signing up for this, they wanted to learn more about investing, more about how to grow their money. This will play a very important role in my workshop in Surrey on the 3rd, but I also have a live masterclass just specific to investing that's 2 hours long that anyone can register for. So investing is important. There's so many reasons that you need to start. First is to build wealth or intergenerational wealth, because again, you don't just want to take care of yourself, you want to take care of your kids, your grandkids. Investing, we already discussed this, but you got to invest to save for retirement. And we know that we need to save close to $1.6 million. You need to invest to reach financial goals. If you aspire to own a home or start a business, you likely need to invest to get there. You want to build on pre-tax dollars. So utilizing an RSP, like a retirement savings plan, and building on pre-tax dollars is something I'm covering in the workshop, but just understand that this is a great way for you to make more money. And then compound interest. That's the idea that you earn interest on interest, coupled with time is the best way to get to 1.6 million by retirement. So it's all about managing risk and not avoiding it. There are a lot of women that I work with who aren't in debt. They have really good savings. They make great income, but they're so scared when it comes to investing. As women, we're naturally more risk adverse, and we're scared to take risks. But unfortunately, when you have money just sitting in a savings account, you're actually losing money because of inflation. So not doing anything with your hard-earned money is equally as bad as being in debt and struggling. You have to understand how to manage risk and you can't avoid it. And that's why I offer these types of sessions. One of the reasons that I built my workshop is to just instill that confidence in you. So let's talk about the difference that investing can make. In fact, let's talk about the difference that 5 years can make with a small amount. So for anyone that's a visual learner similar to myself, on the left-hand side, I have, let's say, someone named Jasmine. And at 20, Jasmine's grandma gave her $2,000 on her birthday. And Jasmine said, hey, I'm going to take this money and I'm going to plop it into my retirement savings plan because Gina told me I need to save 1.6 million. So I need to start. So she takes the $2,000 contribution that her grandma gave her. And then Jasmine builds a budget. It's very similar to the budget that I showed you. And at the very bottom of her budget, it said, hey, Jasmine, you can save close to $250 a month. And she's like, okay, $250 is nothing. Every month, she starts putting $250 into her retirement savings plan. So first she took the $2,000 that her grandma gave her, she put it into her RSP. Then every month she put $250 into her RSPs. Then she took it a step further. The $2,000 plus the $250, she bought an index fund with it, which we'll talk about in a moment. And something that I cover in the workshop as well is how to invest using index funds, mutual funds, stocks, and all that. But basically, she took that money and she invested it into an index fund called VFB, which I'll show you in a moment. With VFB, Jasmine was able to realize an average rate of return of about 8%. So at 65, when Jasmine retires, she ends up with close to 1.4 million. And she literally did that by only putting $2,000 into VFB. And then every month moving forward, she put $250 into that index fund. And by the time she turns 65, she ends up with close to 1.4, which is great. On the right-hand side, we have Jack. Jack bought a really expensive car in his early 20s. He kept making excuses when it came to investing. He said, oh, I'll start eventually. I'll start eventually. At 25, Jack gets a promotion at his job and he's like, okay, maybe I should really start this whole investing thing. He does the same thing. He takes $2,000, he puts it into his retirement savings plan, builds his budget and says, okay, I can easily afford $250 a month. Let's start putting that into my RSPs, does the same thing, buys shares of VFB, realizes the same rate of return, about 8%. Jack at 65, because he started 5 years later, only ends up with 927,000. 5 years compound interest The difference is $472,000. So your key takeaway is you need to learn how to invest. You need to start sooner than later. If you have a large sum sitting in a savings account, it's not doing you any justice. You need to do something with your money. And even if you're not making a crazy ton, starting with as little as $250, like this person did here, made the world of a difference. And the best thing that I can teach you is to take actionable measures to become financially educated, so you know what types of investments make sense for you based on your age, your life stage, and your risk tolerance. Any questions?
We have some from earlier. Do you want to pause for them till the end, or do you want to go ahead and
Any related to investing, and then I'll answer the other ones after.
not related to investing? No, we got some credit score questions.
Okay, perfect. We'll wait on. We'll
Actually,
hold on.
you know what? We got one investing question that just came through. What if you're over 50 and haven't invested yet?
If you're over 50 and you haven't invested yet, it's not too late, but you are someone that doesn't have the appetite to take on as much risk. So what I would recommend is looking into lower risk ETFs. Obviously not investment advice, but from an educational standpoint, what I would suggest is you can still start investing. Don't not avoid it, or definitely don't avoid it, but just understand that your risk appetite isn't as high as like a 30 or 20-year-old who doesn't have as many expenses. So what I would recommend is learning how to invest and then finding investment vehicles that make sense based on your age and your risk appetite. And there are funds out there. Any others?
We're good, thank you.
Okay. I saw someone raise their hand. You feel free to use the Q&A box. I'll reference to it. But again, I'm going to keep going for the sake of time because I realize some people are starting to leave the session, and we did have something we wanted to share with you at the end. So on the left-hand side, and I see this a lot. So let's say I have a healthcare professional that makes $160,000 a year. This girl is a go-getter. She lives at home, she saves all her money, and she keeps it in her savings account. In fact, she saves close to $32,000 a year. And she does this for 40 years. She doesn't learn how to invest. She's too scared to learn. And by the time she turns 65, because she's put aside $32,000 each year, she ends up with around 1.6 million, assuming a 1% rate of return, which you can see with GICs. Sometimes you can see it with savings accounts. So neat. She ended up with 1.6 million. But the point that I'm trying to make is income isn't everything. It's not about how much money you make. Everything with finances, it's not a matter of how much money you make. It's a matter of what you do with the money you make. And your money can work harder than you. So although this healthcare professional that's making well over 6 figures was able to save 32 grand a year, because she was too scared to invest her money and do anything with it, she ends up with 1.6 million. But on the right-hand side, we have someone that was a little bit more savvy with their finances. They took courses, they became educated. And this person, maybe she's a social worker making 60 grand a year. Every year she invests $6,000. So she invests $6,000 and she does that for 40 years, very similar to this person. Her net worth at 65, or the amount she ends up with at 65, assuming an 8% rate of return, is over 1.7 million. So this person making $60,000 compared to the person making 160K that learned how to invest earlier on ends up with more because they made better decisions with their money. So based on that, one second, sorry, my screen's just acting up. The point that I'm trying to make is you want to start investing now, because waiting to invest will make retirement a lot more expensive. So in order to have $1,050,000 by 65, a 20-year-old would need to invest $100 a month, assuming a 10% rate of return. This is all based on a 10% rate of return. So as you can see, as you get older, like that person mentioned, in order for you to catch up, it's more a month. So a 40-year-old would need to invest almost $791 a month into an investment vehicle that earns them 10% in order to have this amount by retirement. So the point is, start early on and even start with a little bit if that's all you have. Okay, let's talk about tax sheltered accounts. So again, for anyone that goes through my workshop, we're going to deep dive into these accounts in more depth. And we're also going to teach you how to invest and how to open up accounts with brokerages and so forth. But before you start investing, the best advice that I can give you is to find out what tax sheltered accounts you can qualify for. So again, if you're based out of Canada, regardless of whether you're in the States and the UK, there's accounts like 401ks, Roth IRAs, ISAs that you can use. And basically what these vehicles do is they're built to maximize your savings. So for simplicity's sake, I'm going to say in Canada, we have a TFSA, an RRSP, an RESP, and an RDSP. Try to become familiar with them and use them to invest. But I do deep dive into these concepts in my workshop. Let's talk about index funds and ETFs. So I had a lot of questions about investing, and unfortunately, I can't go over everything today, but I do have classes and workshops that deep dive into these topics. But the one thing that I did want to teach you that makes sense for the average person is to look into index funds and ETFs. If there's one takeaway that you have when it comes to investing, it should be the fact that you shouldn't be investing in a ton of individual stocks. Investing in individual stocks is risky. It's how you lose money. There are easier, more autopilot ways for you to invest and make money. And index funds is one of those ways. So an index fund is a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and securities that's basically designed to mirror a market. Index funds give us an idea of where the stock market is at, or the direction that it's headed in. And there's different types of indexes. Today, you'll hear me talk about VFV and the S&P 500. In a nutshell, when I talk about the S&P 500, just realize that it's an index. And within that index is basically a portfolio, and it's made up of every single sector and industry you can think of. With the S&P 500, it takes a look at the top 500 publicly traded companies in the United States. These are the largest companies in the United States. Think Apple, think Google, think Amazon. Most of the companies in the S&P 500 are in tech and healthcare. When you invest into the S&P 500, the average rate of return based on how it's performed in the past is around 8 to 10%. But again, this isn't investment advice, and historical rates of return are never an indicator of future rates of return, but it is something that you want to pay attention to. To take it a step further, there are ETFs that track certain stock market indexes, like the S&P 500. ETFs are a basket. So when you buy shares of an ETF, you are basically buying a basket full of stocks and securities that are sold on the stock exchange. In many cases, it could be like a basket full of some of the biggest companies in the United States if you invest into a fund that tracks the S&P 500. I like ETFs over mutual funds because they have lower management expense ratios, making them better than mutual funds. If you don't know what a management expense ratio is, or some of this seems like jargon, I would recommend signing up for my masterclass on investing, where I deep dive into this for 2 hours. But in a nutshell, if you're someone that has mutual funds right now, learn how to invest into index funds and ETFs, just learn what they are, and you will save so much money in the long run. Because the fees that mutual funds charge you are so incredible, to the point where if you invested into ETFs, for example, with lower fees, you might be able to retire 5 years sooner. That's the impact that fees have. When it comes to investing into index funds and ETFs, you can use online brokerages like Wealthsimple. I think someone actually had a question that I can reference to. Should I go through the bank and have them invest for me, or should I use Wealthsimple and invest myself? The answer is learn how to invest. Do it yourself, take a self-directed approach, but make sure you know what you're doing. And that's why I offer classes where I educate you on all the things that you want to look at. When you go to the bank, I've worked at a bank for 5 years. I saw what my colleagues were doing. I saw how much product pushing was taking place from upper management. There are so many bank representatives that will not actually sit down with you and ask the questions or go into as much depth as I'm going into with you right now. One, some of them don't know how to do their jobs. Two, it's a 9 to 5. They're just there for a paycheck. So oftentimes when I look at people's investment statements, for example, if they're with TD, they're invested into something called the TD Comfort Balance Fund, which in my opinion is the worst fund that a 20 or 30-year-old could be in from a perspective that it doesn't really grow their money. So what you want to do is learn. The more knowledge you have, the better decisions you're going to be able to make. And that's when you can even, what I teach you, like in my workshops, is I'm going to teach you how to assess your own statements so that when you go to the bank and they're recommending something, you're going to say, okay, I need to look at the MER. I'm going to look at the historical performance. I'm going to look at what this is actually invested in so that you can make a more informed decision. And I feel like that's a lot more powerful than someone just telling you what to do with your money. So let's talk about VFB. Like I mentioned, and again, if you're new to investing and this is just like not making sense, it's okay. That's why I offer one-on-one sessions and workshops where I go into these topics in depth, but just try to digest as much as you can. VFB is basically an ETF. It's a Canadian ETF that tracks the S&P 500. We know that the S&P 500 is the top publicly traded companies in the United States, the top 500. If we take a look at VFB today, a single share of this ETF is $93. So if I had $94, I could buy one share of VFB today. If we take a look at the performance over the last year, VFB has dropped by 11%. Someone that's new to investing would be like, oh my gosh, you know, my stock market portfolio is so down right now. But anyone that's educated and understands what's happening with the stock market right now understands that eventually it will pick back up. And this red is a good buying opportunity. It means that VFB is actually on sale right now, and you want to buy assets and you want to invest into things when they're on sale, especially when you have a long time horizon, like retirement. So with VFB, yes, it's down over the last year, but if we take a look at the 5-year average on the right-hand side, it's up 58%. So if someone invested in VFB just before 2019, so I think this is 2018, they would have purchased a single share for $60. So even that person, if they only bought one share for like 60 something dollars, that share today would be worth $93. And the way that you make money in the stock market is you buy stocks, you buy ETFs, you buy shares of assets that you believe are going to go up in value, and then you just sit on it. And the way that you make money is 5 years later, when that balance grows, you sell it, and then the difference is basically what you've profited. This I will cover in a lot more depth in my investing masterclass, but if we take a look at this, for any one of you that is a visual learner similar to myself, this chart on the left-hand side basically shows you that if someone had invested in VFB when the fund first started, and maybe they had $10,000 and they just threw $10,000 into this fund and they never added and made more contributions, that 10 grand today would be worth close to about 39,000 almost. So it fluctuates because basically what's happening is the stock market's very volatile. There's up and downwards movements. And even though right now the stock market is down, if you take a look at it, the general overall trend with the S&P 500 is that it's upwards. Yes, there's dips, but the point that I'm trying to make is if you have a long enough time horizon, you will make money if you've done your due diligence in getting educated and investing in funds that make sense for you based on your age, your risk, and your time horizon. So with VFB, based on where it's at currently, and I apologize, the font's really small, but VFB's top 10 holdings right now. So if you invested into this ETF, which is a basket, right now the top 10 holdings are Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, Google, Berkshire Hathaway. Some of these companies, if you were to try to buy a share of their stock right now just by itself, would cost you so much. But by investing into ETFs, you're getting a basket full of some of the biggest companies in VFB's case for only $93 per share. So it's a cost-effective way to invest. It reduces your risk because you're invested in 500 companies. And in my opinion, the average person is better off just learning about index funds and ETFs and investing consistently into them. So the last thing that I wanted to show you for anyone that is currently investing is when you start investing, there's going to be good years and there's going to be bad years. But like I mentioned with VFB, generally speaking, and it's an upwards trend. So when you look at the top 500 US stocks in 2022, all year, it's been a red downwards movement. And a lot of people that are invested are, they're not feeling so good. But on the right-hand side, if you zoom out and you look at the bigger picture, and it's funny because real estate is very similar too. If you take a look at the top 500 US stocks from 1982 to 2022. I don't know what I'm doing right now. I'm so out of it. But basically, when you look at the stock market from 1982 to now, it's an upwards trend, and it's green, and it's not linear, but overall, there is an upwards trend. So this is more so for the people that start investing. A lot of people don't have emotional intelligence. They get scared and they sell off their stocks when they notice that the value of their stocks has dropped. So what you want to do is when you are investing, you just want to make sure that you understand why you started. You understand what's happening with the stock market and the economy in general, so that when your portfolio is down, you don't panic and sell. The next thing that we'll talk about is real estate. So very similar to investing in stocks, I would highly encourage every single person here to put a plan in place to purchase real estate. Historically speaking, most of the millionaires in North America accumulated their wealth because they purchased real estate. And I would highly encourage every single person here to put a plan in place to do so. I'm also a licensed mortgage broker. So for anyone here that's based out of BC, Alberta, or Ontario, I can actually help you with your mortgage or if you're refinancing. But real estate investments are a way for investors to diversify their portfolio. Real estate can produce a steady cash flow. They provide substantial appreciation, and they do all of that while increasing your individual net worth. So real estate is important because it helps you generate wealth. It helps you build equity, which we're going to talk about in my workshop, and how leveraging works. It protects you against inflation. Real estate is actually an asset that is seen as a hedge against inflation. It funds retirement. There's a ton of people that don't have 1.6 million saved, but luckily enough, they own more than one property, and they know that if they just sell and downsize, they might be able to live off the capital gains. And there's tax advantages. So 90% of millionaires became millionaires because they invested in real estate. And regardless of how old you are right now, I would encourage you to build a plan to purchase real estate. And a lot of what we talked about kind of transitions well into this. Like, you build a budget, you take a look at how much you have left over at the end of the month. You take that surplus and you invest it into the stock market, you buy ETFs. And then, 5 years later, you've built a down payment. You sell off your stocks, you take that down payment and you invest in a property while you continuously keep investing in the stock market. And that's how you're able to kind of diversify your investment streams and build wealth. I apologize if I'm talking fast or not making any sense. I feel like I'm really tired right now and I've had a long day, but I appreciate your patience. The last thing that I wanted to cover when it comes to real estate is leveraging. So again, remember how earlier on when I talked about bad debt and good debt, mortgages are seen as good debt. When you get a mortgage, you're going to a bank and you're saying, hey, I want to purchase this property. I'm purchasing real estate, but I don't have the ability to put $1 million down to purchase a townhouse here in the Lower Mainland. So what you do is when you purchase real estate, you put money down, and then the rest of that purchase is financed in the form of a mortgage. So what the wealthy do is they purchase one property. Once they've purchased one property and they've built equity in it, they tap into that equity. So in a nutshell, leveraging is the idea that you use debt to invest. And leveraging basically gives you the ability to buy assets that may be out of your reach, but they do increase your returns over time. And one of the best things that you can do with real estate is purchase an asset. So let's say you buy a condo today, and 4 years later, your mortgage balance is starting to go down, but that condo that you bought 4 years ago has gone up in value. And that difference between you paying down the mortgage and it simultaneously going up in value is what we call equity. And what you can do is pull that equity out of the first property and then potentially use it to invest and purchase a second property and then a third. And that's how people build wealth. And that's how, a lot of families, when they first came to Canada, they purchased real estate and they understood this concept, and then they were able to purchase like a second property or a third. So regardless of where you're at, whether you had that luxury or not, or whether, you're just starting out, that's something you want to think about. So again, it starts with a pre-approval, regardless of what stage you're at, whether you own a property, whether you've never purchased a property. One of the best decisions that you can make is to get a mortgage pre-approval. So if you're a first-time home buyer and you're whether this is your first home or whether you are a bit more knowledgeable and experienced because you've already owned a home, a pre-approval is one of the first steps that you can take in the home buying process. So mortgage pre-approval is key. A lot of people don't really understand what like a pre-qualification or a pre-approval is, but I always say work backwards. If you know that 5 years from now you want to purchase a property, or even 2 years from now or a year from now, the best decision you can make is to talk to a mortgage broker like myself and say, hey, Gina, based on my income, based on my debt, based on my credit, based on my savings, if I wanted to buy a property today, how much could I qualify for? Maybe we do the pre-approval and it's only 500,000 and you're upset. At least you know that, hey, now I need to save X amount, or hey, I need to reduce my debt by X amount, or I need to build my down payment by X amount. And then in a year, I can actually purchase that property. But a lot of people don't do that. They just randomly put money aside. They keep saving. They're not investing properly. And then when they think they're ready to buy a property, they go see a mortgage broker, but then they don't qualify. So get a mortgage pre-approval done. It helps you work backwards. And on top of that, with a mortgage pre-approval, when I work with my clients, I'm telling them this is the maximum amount you qualify for. But when I look at your finances, if it's a little tight, or maybe you're in an industry where your income fluctuates, a good mortgage broker would tell you, don't max it out. If you qualify for 1.2 million, but your cash flow is a little tight, maybe, yes, you qualify for 1.2 million, but maybe you should kind of try to shop for something a little bit lower so that it's affordable. So a mortgage broker will also tell you the monthly mortgage payments associated with your purchase price, what type of rate you could qualify for, and just go over all of those terms with you. So my details are listed there. You can take a picture of that, but I will be emailing you and you'll have access to my contact information. If you're in BC, Alberta, or Ontario, this is something I can help you with. Are there any questions, Arush?
No, we're good.
Okay, we're almost done. Thank you so much for your patience. So let's talk about insurance. Insurance is one of the most important financial products, but also one of the insurance products that, one of the most important financial products that isn't talked about. So disability insurance protects your ability to earn a paycheck. Not only does disability insurance protect your ability to earn a paycheck, but it protects your loved ones. So last year in 2021, I personally knew 6 people that were diagnosed with cancer. And I can promise you not a single one of those people thought they were going to wake up one day and have that diagnosis. The odds of developing cancer are 1 in 2. And as scary as it seems, and it's something you don't want to think about, this is the reality of it. If your family has a history of cancer, you are actually, the odds of you developing cancer are even higher. So what I need you to understand is that insurance is so important. It's something you need to look into. No one knows when an unexpected injury or illness is going to happen, which is why insurance is so important. Sorry, excuse me. Give me 1 second. The average critical illness like cancer, heart attack, stroke, can last 2 to 5 years. Imagine going 2 to 5 years without a paycheck. I want you to think about that. Like, how would that impact your life? The average injury actually occurs outside of the workplace, so you don't have coverage through WCB, and that injury can impact a person on average for 32 months. So you guys really need to look into insurance. This is something that I'll send you an email about. And if you want to connect with a professional that can give you a second opinion on how much insurance you need and what you would qualify for, excuse me, I would highly recommend it. Even if you have coverage through work, it's never enough. It's never something you want to rely on. It's usually like, oh, your employer will pay 60% of your salary for 3 months. First of all, 60% isn't enough. 3 months, you know, the average illness lasts 32 months, or average illness lasts 32 months. So what you actually want to do is sit down with a certified financial planner or insurance specialist, have them take a look at your coverage, and then create a policy that supplements the difference. Really think about how your life would be impacted if you had a critical illness or injury, because again, you just don't know what life has in store for you. And you're working so hard to buy these assets, you're working so hard to save. You definitely don't want something like this to happen in your life where it puts you in a position where now you're not saving, or worst case, you've depleted your savings. And now it's going to take even longer to achieve certain goals. Thanks for your patience. I think there's a question. Should you go to a different place to see who gives you the best reapproval? Really good question, Amanda. So when it comes to mortgages, you can shop around. As a mortgage broker, though, the key difference is that I don't actually work for one bank. I have access to more than 50 different lenders, and my job as a broker is to actually find you the best mortgage product based on your life stage and the best interest rate. What I will throw out there, though, is interest is definitely very important. Like the interest rate on your mortgage is important, but it's not the only thing that you should be thinking about. Second to this, you need to make sure you're working with a professional. When you go to the bank, most of these people, again, are working a 9 to 5. Obviously, that's not the case for everyone. Like people are really passionate about their job and they do a great job at that. But think about all the experiences you've had at the bank. I'm sure I don't have to get into it with you. So when you work with a mortgage professional, you want to work with someone that knows what they're doing, that actually cares about you. And I myself, as a mortgage broker, take a lot of pride in the work that I do for my clients. I've also had a lot of nightmare situations where people have come to me like a week before their purchase is closing saying, oh, my mortgage broker backed out. They said it was pre-approved and I wasn't. And now they have like their livelihood is on the line because you pay such a giant deposit to purchase a place. So there are a lot of situations where people don't do their due diligence to research the professionals that they're working with, or they just go with this person that their mom or dad recommended. And unfortunately, not everyone is passionate about the work that they do or an expert. So my recommendation would be to just do your research and go to the person that you feel like is going to take care of you and has your best interests at heart. Is getting a fixed rate renewal at this point a right decision? I wouldn't go with a fixed rate, but to answer your question, there's no right or wrong answer. There's a reason that fixed rates exist, and there's a reason that variable rates exist. My recommendation is to reach out to me after this conversation. Email me. We can hop on a call when it comes to mortgages, and I can kind of discuss options with you. But there's no right or wrong answer. Like when it comes to your personal finances, I always say they're so personal to you for a reason, which is why when you go to a bank and they give you cookie cutter solutions, it doesn't work. So I would highly recommend either working one-on-one with me or going through my workshop, because what I do is so personalized to each individual person. We're almost done. So that's pretty much the workshop for today. I hope that you took something out of it and you found it helpful. Like I mentioned before, I'm really excited because on December 3rd, for those of you that are BC residents, I'm hosting my very first in-person workshop. If you found today helpful, just realize that what I'm doing in person is going to be 3 times beyond what was taught today, a lot more in depth and a lot more personalized to you. So with this workshop, basically, we're going to jump into understanding what your relationship is like with money. And this is really important because a lot of us don't understand that the way that we learned about money in our early childhood and the relationship that we had with money is actually deeper rooted, and it actually does show up as an adult. Second to this, there's a lot of weekly and monthly habits that people need to implement into their lifestyle when it comes to the way that they manage their money. Like, how often do you guys look at your credit report? How often do you look at your credit card statements? So I'm going to teach you what type of habits you need to start implementing to build that foundation that helps you work towards building wealth. We're going to build your budget using my unique cash flow formula together. And by the end of it, you're going to know exactly how much money you can save and invest. And then from there, we're going to talk about steps that you can take to reduce discretionary spending. Second to this, we're going to talk about the long-term and short-term goals that you want to set for yourself. We're going to talk about exactly how much you need to save for an emergency. I'm going to teach you how to open up sinking funds and which sinking funds you need open, because those are a big, and they play like a very important role in setting up financial systems. Thirdly, we're going to talk about tax planning. Tax is something we didn't touch on today, but I have a CPA coming into my workshop, and she's going to give you guys tips on how to save on taxes, whether you're self-employed or not. Tax season is something that stresses every Canadian out. So this is going to be super helpful. I'm going to talk to you about good debt and bad debt in more depth and how to manage it. I'm going to teach you how to read your credit bureau. So every single person that registers for this workshop is going to have a copy of their credit bureau. They're going to know exactly what steps they need to take to improve their score, get it to excellent, and they're going to be able to do it within 30 to 60 days if they follow my tips. We're going to talk more about compound interest and time. So I showed you a couple of examples, but it transitions well into investing. So I'm going to talk about stocks in more depth, real estate investment trusts, because guess what? There's actually ways to invest in real estate without physically purchasing property, and you do it by investing into the stock market. So I'm going to teach you more about that. Every individual will build an investment plan where they know exactly how much money they need to set aside, and how much they can expect it to grow by if they do it consistently. Again, we're going to dive deeper into the stock market, talk more about real estate and how it really helps people get to millionaire status, and we'll deep dive into mortgages as well. So the reason I built this workshop is because I really think it's not just about having more money in your savings account. Money opens up so many opportunities. There's so many of you that deserve to go on a vacation. There's so many people that deserve to purchase real estate, but they don't have a plan to get there. And I know that by working with me and going through a seminar like this, it's basically going to help you get there sooner, especially when it comes to saving for things like retirement. So this is something that I would recommend. If you're not in town or you can't make it, I will try to do something through Zoom in the next 3 months. But it's the first time I'm hosting something like this. And yeah, I'm just like very excited. So for those of you that joined today, you are getting an exclusive discount. So you can take a picture of this, scan the barcode. But for anyone that's based out of the Lower Mainland, you are actually going to be able to save an additional 10% if you register for the workshop before 6 p.m. tomorrow. In addition to this, the first 20 people that enroll actually get a free ticket to my masterclass on investing, which is held on December 11th, and that's a more in-depth discussion on investing. So if you want to take advantage of that, you can. You'll also have this email to you. For those of you that joined today's session and you're not able to make it to BC or Surrey, I also wanted to offer you something, and that's a discount on my masterclass on investing. So if you can't make it to the workshop, but you really want to deep dive into investing deeper and it's intrigued you today, you can scan the second barcode and you'll also save 10% off of the listed price for the class. Other than that, thank you so much for listening to me and putting up with me. I apologize if I seemed a little